33rd.
Hello and welcome to this week's What's in Your Box video, in which week by week I explain the contents of the Wild Box. And we've still got quite a few fresh ingredients this week, which is particularly good given it's the first week in December. Something like chickweed is probably not going to go on for too many more weeks. It'll probably be knocked back when the first really heavy frosts kick in. Three-corner garlic, despite being a soft herb, that's probably going to go right the way through the winter, and that's partly because we harvest it from Cornwall, which has more of a Mediterranean kind of climate and never has really the extent of harsh cold winter weather that some other areas have. The sea radish and the wild cabbage, as I've mentioned in earlier weeks, they're both cabbage family plants which seem to be particularly well adapted to the cold winter weather. Wild cabbage, I always like to mention, it is the wild ancestor of all of our brassicas, and as you'll know, a lot of those run through the winter as well. It's particularly good for cauliflowers at the moment. Brussels sprouts in the Christmas period are standard fare, of course, and that's just, it just illustrates the fact that these plants they really are winter foods. The crab apples still hanging on the trees. They don't seem to mind the cold weather. And then we also have a few ingredients this week which come from our dry store, and we'll be seeing more of those as the winter goes on. We've got a lot of stuff that we've dried, pickled, fermented, and otherwise preserved, both to make the best of the harvest, the abundant harvest in the time of year when they're most available, and also to provide supplies in the winter period when there's fewer fresh ingredients available. So what we have this week in the way of the dry store, we have two different dried seaweeds. This is Atlantic wakame, and it does look a bit similar to the Japanese wakame in that it's difficult to see it really in this dried form, but there is a midrib running up the middle, and then these sort of feathery wings coming out either side. So pretty much the same as Japanese wakame if you've ever seen that fresh or whole. The flavour's a bit different though. It's more of a sort of meaty, savoury flavour. Ideal for broths, which is what we're going to be using it for this week, along with the toothed rack. So just a small amount of both to make a sort of seaweed combination for a really nice stock or broth as a basis for this week's soup. Acorns. I'm very excited to be introducing these to the Wild Box. Acorns have been a dietary staple in various parts of the world where there's a lot of oak trees, and hunter-gatherer cultures would have harvested them in great numbers, and then leached out the tannins and phytic acid, which make them less than suitable as food. But once those are leached out, you have an excellent source of carbohydrate and protein. So people would have put those in rivers, inside bags, where the water can just flow through, and then it'd have ground them into flour or meal and used them through the course of the year. We're going to make a rather different use of them by roasting, because roasting seems to take care of some of the tannins, making the flavour a lot less bitter and astringent. But it also produces a wonderful sort of toffee flavour, a kind of toasty toffee flavour. And acorns have in the past and still are used as a kind of coffee substitute, acorn coffee. Well, a chef called David Everett Mathias put two and two together with that and thought, well, if it's a coffee flavour, then maybe that's something that could be used as a flavouring in food. He came up with a recipe for acorn panna cotta, and it's exactly that recipe we're going to use in this week's Wild Box, other than the fact that he strains out the acorns, since it's a kind of classical, very refined French restaurant. He's wanting to get a smoother texture. We've left the bits in because I like to use the whole acorn, and I think it's still very nice like that. And that's going to be topped with just a puree of roasted crab apples to add a bit of sourness as a foil for the very rich flavour of the panna cotta. Chickweed and three-corner garlic are going to go into the soup, and then there's a lovely recipe with just potatoes and cabbage that's going to have these wild brassicas go in as well. So a lot of just winter comfort food really in this week's recipes. And so yeah, that's pretty much it for this week's What's in Your Box.
Warbot number 33rd.